And you're Joy?
Yes.
And what's your last name?
Howard.
Howard. So I'm a cardiologist by training. I've worked in research for a number of years in industry with Solvay and Abbott Pharmaceuticals in R&D, research and development, leading various programs. But then a stint in the sort of gas and chemical industry as well. I've been at Piedmont for the last 5.5 years in a variety of roles, leading their cardiovascular research, strategy for all of research across the system, their innovation program, and now the clinical lead for the COVID task force. And what about you?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm Joy Howard. And I was one of those people in the beginning that when the vaccine was starting or coming out, in the beginning, I said, I'm never going to get that, right? But then as time goes on and people around you either become infected or you have loved ones in your household that have underlying conditions, you want to protect them and you want to protect yourself. So now I am at a point where I just want more information and transparency about the vaccine. And so I appreciate you also taking part in this. That way I can be informed to make the best decision for me with all the information that I have.
Okay.
So I have a whole list of questions, and I hope I don't kind of ramble or just go all over the place.
Okay.
But it's just to help me kind of figure out what I ultimately want to do.
Sure. I love that.
I guess I'll start with the number one question is, if you've had COVID-19 before, do you need the vaccine?
Right. So the answer to that is yes. You still need the vaccine. It's unclear how long you have immunity or if you have immunity. And so we do definitely want you to have the vaccine to have that protection. And once you've cleared the COVID disease process and you are symptom free, you're certainly eligible for the vaccine.
And so with the vaccine, how it's rolled out, like in Georgia, they have it tiered where you have the 65 and older population and their caregivers, and then everyone else kind of falls underneath that.
Right.
Do you suspect that the people that have been tested positive, will they kind of go at the end of that spectrum, or will it just be, it's all open to the general public?
Right. So they're going in tiers, and as far as I know, it's not based on whether or not you've had the disease or not. It's based on a variety of factors regarding your risk for exposure. And your risk of exposing others. So it started with frontline workers, in addition to people in long-term care facilities and nursing homes, employees and patients. And then it moved to first responders, so paramedics, ambulance drivers, police officers, firemen, but also people in research, working in laboratories, those kinds of things. So people who would have some exposure. And we're looking at those 65 years of age and older, as you noted. So it's going to go based on your inherent risk of contracting the disease. That being said, we have a new administration coming in tomorrow. It may be completely different on Thursday, and they may just sort of open it up to say everybody who wants it, here it is at the pharmacy. We want everybody to come in such that we can try to approach herd immunity as quickly as possible. I don't know what their strategy would be, but so far, this is the way the rollout has been in 2020.
And then once you receive the vaccine, do you know how the time frame that it works for you kind of to be immune or protected against COVID?
Sure. So we have 2 vaccines out currently. And that's Moderna and Pfizer. And we actually have another one coming up for FDA consideration this week, actually on Thursday, on the 21st of January. But let's talk about the 2 that are out now under emergency use authorization. They're messenger RNA vaccines. The Moderna vaccine is 2 doses, and they're taken 28 days apart. The Pfizer vaccine is also 2 doses, and those 2 doses are taken 21 days apart, so 4 weeks and 3 weeks. The Moderna vaccine, which is taken 4 weeks apart between doses 1 and 2, after your second dose, there's an additional 2 weeks before you have full immunity. So a total of 6 weeks for the entire process. For Pfizer, you take their 2 doses 3 weeks apart, and there's an additional 1 week after the second dose for full immunity. So full immunity is conferred with Pfizer in 4 weeks, and full immunity is conferred with Moderna in 6 weeks.
Okay.
That's a difference of 2 weeks. That's really negligible
Yeah.
in the whole scope of how do you select a vaccine. I would say whatever vaccine is available to you,
Okay.
please select it.
Okay.
That 2-week difference is nominal.
Okay. That was going to be my follow-up question. Do we have an option to choose either one, or is just whichever available at your provider or at the local health department?
So currently it's whatever is available.
Gotcha.
And I've looked at the FDA briefing documents, read them actually from both Moderna and Pfizer that they filed with the FDA.
Okay.
And there just are not significant differences to really create a preference for one of these vaccines over the other.
Okay.
One is 94.5% efficacy, meaning it works in preventing the contraction of COVID. The other is 95%. I mean, it's so narrow. So I would say whatever vaccine you have access to, not just you, anybody.
Right.
At this point, we only have 2 vaccines. Whichever one you have access to should be the one that you receive.
Okay. And speaking of the different pharmaceutical companies, I know the Pfizer and Moderna is out. Do they pull their data together? Like, how do they make the recipe for the vaccine? Is it just one recipe and they share it, or do they come up with their own research and present that for approval?
So the messenger RNA platform is the same, but then where it varies is, the emulsification, how they develop it such that it goes into an injection.
Okay.
But the messenger RNA technology is the same. And then sort of those other basic parameters are very similar. I mean, vaccine technology and development, there are just some things that are just standard in the development. This messenger RNA technology is new as well.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
And when I say new, I want to be clear. When I say new, it's actually been around since the 90s. Actually discovered in the 60s.
Okay.
Really started researching it in the 90s, but it's new to us.
Okay.
Because this is the first time we're using it in a vaccine delivery.
Yeah.
But not new to science, but new to the public.
Okay.
Right.
Because I was wondering what's in the vaccine, and do we see it in other vaccines or other medications that people may use to feel better, because I don't know what's in it.
Right. So it's a new platform. This is all messenger RNA technology. So previous vaccines have been live viruses, so you actually get the real virus. But it's attenuated, meaning it's weakened and diluted to the point that it should not cause illness, but should be enough to stimulate your immune system to recognize, oh, we have a foreign substance. We have to mount these antibodies. So that's how viruses have been made in the past for the most part. So when we talk about polio, measles, chickenpox, rubella, these are all live, what we call attenuated viruses. This is a completely different platform, which is why there is no risk of contracting COVID by receiving the vaccine, which is not true of the other vaccines. Even though it's rare, surely there's a risk because you're actually getting part of the virus. You're not getting the virus this time. You're getting a messenger RNA code that creates that spike protein, the key part of the coronavirus, that attaches to your cells, and that's how you become infected. So you're not able to contract COVID-19 with this just by getting the vaccine. The vaccine does not, it's just not possible because it's not the virus. Yeah.
And so if you get the vaccine, let's just say on a Monday, or you may have been exposed to COVID before you get the vaccine, and you get the vaccine, does it cure it, or wouldn't it show up on a test? Like, have there been any studies or anyone saying that they got the vaccine but still tested positive for COVID?
Sure. So you can test positive for COVID even after receiving the vaccine. There are generally 2 scenarios for that. One is you actually had been in contact with it before the vaccine and didn't realize it.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Or you came in contact with it just after receiving that first dose and you didn't realize it.
Right. And if that's the case, are those people, if you get it, even if your immune system is building, are your symptoms less likely to be as severe?
Right. So we think the symptoms will be a little less. It's sort of the same as if you receive the chickenpox vaccine and then contract chickenpox, you have a milder case.
Right.
And so this is what we expect as well.
Okay. And I don't believe I've had vaccines before, and I don't have an allergic reaction to them.
Right.
But do you know what's in them to kind of make someone allergic?
Right. So when we talk about our standard vaccines, you know, sometimes they use poultry products, shellfish products, those kinds of things. That's why we have to ask those questions with regard to egg allergies and these kinds of things when you take the vaccine. Remember, these are not live viruses. This is a messenger RNA that will code for a protein. So all of those allergy questions for the previous virus vaccines are not relevant to this vaccine.
And could the vaccine potentially protect against different strands of the coronavirus?
So as far as we know, it's protective against all known strains currently. But we have to remember the virus mutates frequently. And so there's been over 2,500 mutations. These are small mutations, small what we call base pairs. So really rarely enough to make the virus more virulent or more aggressive. Because I think that's what people really think when people think about mutations. They think something's becoming bigger, angrier, crazier. But actually, in science, the word mutation just means it's changing. And sometimes it changes and becomes less effective. So what the news media has been highlighting are some strains that were identified in the UK, in South Africa, in the US. These strains were not more virulent, meaning they were not stronger, but they appeared to be more infectious, meaning more contagious. So if you were to come in contact with them, you're even more likely
to get it,
to contract COVID-19 than some of the previous strains. And because that strain is more infectious, it starts to become the dominant strain in the area because
people
it's more successful, So it sort of takes over. And so then people think, oh my gosh, look how strong it's, you know, it's killed all the others. But it really hasn't. It's just more successful because it's more contagious. And so the reason we see mortality increase with these strains, meaning death rates, is not because the percentage of deaths is increasing, but the volume, the number of people now that are contracting COVID is higher because it's more contagious. Remember, there have been over 2,500 mutations. Very, very few of them have actually been traced and identified, and we have a genomic sequence for them. In fact, most of them have not. More than 90% have never been. We've had a terrible tracing and tracking mechanism, not only here in the United States, but worldwide. So even though you're hearing about these, there probably were others as well that might have been more successful, some that were more prevalent in a specific region, and we just have not tracked and traced them. So as far as we can tell, as they've developed these first two vaccines, they are covering all of the strains because most of the base pair changes are not large enough to really impact how the vaccine and the messenger RNA technology will work.
That makes sense. And when we talk about mutation and different strains, from my understanding, what a mutation is it something that happens within someone in their cells, and then that changes the form of the virus?
Right. So the mutation happens outside of your body when the virus is living free in the air. So that's before you contract it. So that's how, like the flu, every year there are different strains. It doesn't create the strain in your body. So it's in the air. And it has mutated and changed. Every organism has this the push for life, right? And so you change, you adapt. And so the flu vaccine does that as well. It doesn't do it, the flu does that as well. It doesn't do it inside of your body. But every year there are different strains.
I don't know if it's come about in this study or the trials or any prior vaccines, but has there been any links to underlying conditions reported from a vaccine? Like, is there anyone in the population that should not get the vaccine? If they have, I don't know. I just have a friend who gave birth, and then after her birth, this underlying medical condition had came about. So I don't know if there's any links to any underlying medical conditions coming from this vaccine, or if there's any from any prior vaccines.
So in the FDA briefing documents, both Moderna and Pfizer reported some cases of Bell's palsy. Bell's palsy is paralysis of one side of your face. A small number of cases. We have to remember that they are 30,000 to 40,000 people in these trials. And I say a small number of cases. I think one was 4 patients. The other may have been 7. And then those are also between 2 groups. The group that actually received the vaccine. Because people who didn't receive the vaccine also developed Bell's palsy. So confounding the results, and it appears that it's just part of what would naturally occur in the environment. That being said, they will be taking a closer look at that. And then for Pfizer as well, there was a sporadic number of patients, I think 7, who developed appendicitis. Again, confounding results because people in the placebo group also developed appendicitis. So again, it appears as if this could just be the natural course. If you look at 30 or 40,000 people, there will be some number that will develop appendicitis independent of whether they're in the active arm, meaning they actually received the vaccine, or the placebo arm, meaning they received the dummy vaccine. So, but those things will be looked at. Other than that, the most common side effects were headache, nausea, vomiting, chills, fever, myalgias, which are muscle aches, injection arm pain, and stiffness. Very, very, very similar to the side effect profile of the flu shot.
And will we have to get the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, annually? Does it replace the flu vaccine? Does it cover all?
So it does not. So this is a different virus than the flu virus. So currently, there's a vaccine for each. The flu virus does not cover the SARS-CoV-2 virus. That's the virus that causes this. Severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2. And the SARS-CoV-2, or the COVID vaccine as we know it, doesn't cover the flu. What we don't know about the COVID vaccine is a question that you want to ask. Is it going to be annual? Do we have to get it every year? Do we get it every 2 years? Is it like chicken pox? I get it. I don't have to think about it for another 10 or 15 years. So the answer to that is we don't know. So we have to remember that these vaccines are not FDA approved. The FDA granted them EUA, Emergency Use Authorization. The reason they are not approved is because all of the data is not yet available on the trials. Now, what part of the data is missing? All of that follow-up data. The data after patients have received both vaccines, now we have to follow them for a period of time, a year, 2 years, draw titers, determine what the immunity is. Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it staying the same? We don't have that data because the United States and the world recognized that we were in a pandemic within an emergency and decided to approve the vaccines based on their safety profile and based on their efficacy, meaning that they were safe and that they worked in preventing COVID. The other answers that we normally would have to get full FDA approval after we follow these 70,000 patients out for the next year or 2, we don't have that. I think Moderna and Pfizer had somewhere between 2 to 4 months of follow-up data. So in this case, what we're talking about is immunity data, which showed that patients were immune. So every single month that goes by, we have another month of data for immunities. So maybe at this point we're at 5 or 6 months. Next month we'll have 7 months of data. Next month we'll have 8 months. So actually, we're all in this in real time. And we are learning about the immunity data every single month as it comes in. And so stay tuned. You will learn as you go how much, and then we will get guidance from the FDA, from Moderna and Pfizer and other companies with regard to what their data is showing as they continue to follow these patients out for immunity. And then the last thing you addressed, you talked about pregnancy. There were patients in both trials that had unintentional pregnancies, so they were unplanned. Those patients will still be followed. I believe it was 23 patients in the Pfizer trial. and another 13 in the Moderna trial. So those patients and those babies will be followed all the way out to term. But as far as we can tell, as those patients have been followed, there have been what we call no sequelae. We're not seeing any effects at all.
And I think that is the two major concerns is what was removed from the vaccine, getting it through, and the long-term effects, which we don't know yet, like you just said, because it's ongoing. And it was a need for the emergency, and that was pretty much the only thing lifted, was not having it FDA approved because we were in a state of emergency.
Right.
And I think that is, for me, one of the concerns.
Right.
And then with the data and the trials, are these individuals in the United States or are they international?
So these are international trials, but the majority of the patients were in the United States. But other countries were included in the Moderna and Pfizer trials.
So I want to know.
And something to keep in mind when you're asking were ingredients moved or what's taken out, how did you get it approved so fast? So when we think about this virus, people call it COVID-19 because that's the disease. But the virus that causes the disease is called SARS-CoV-2, severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2. The reason it's named number 2 is because there was a number 1. The number 1 was the SARS outbreak of 2003, severe acute respiratory syndrome. After that, we had a MERS outbreak, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, in 2009. Since 2003, when we had that first SARS outbreak, all the preclinical data was completed. All of the benchmark research was completed. The identification of all 30,000 base pairs of the virus was completed. The identification of the spike protein being the key part that's transferring infection and where and that it should be targeted in any vaccine development. All of that was done before we even had our very first case of COVID-19 on the shores. So although it appears that everything happened so quickly, the fact of the matter was 17 years of research came to bear, and that was the foundation upon which the vaccine could begin to be developed, and it was being developed with new messenger RNA technology and not the old attenuated dilution of viruses, which also allows us to move forward into science, which can oftentimes be more efficient and more effective and allow us to develop vaccines more quickly.
And then the last question, I believe this is the last question. We're just piggybacking off of what you said about FDA approval. At what point will the vaccine become FDA? Is it after you've had the research on just monitoring those who received it within like a year or two? Is there a time frame?
So the standard time frame is, there is no standard time frame, so I'm going to give you the example of that. The standard time frame is after the last patient has completed whatever their follow-up time frame is. So follow-up is for a year. After the last patient who received the second dose of the vaccine has completed an entire 1-year follow-up, then all of that data is compiled. Then that is submitted to the FDA for full approval. Right. So that's that immunity data that you're talking about. We don't have it. So we're waiting for all of that to come in, and that is just time. We've got to follow them for a year or so, and it's got to be everybody. So if you're talking about 70,000 patients, 30,000 in one trial, 40,000 in the next, they weren't all enrolled on the same day. So they were enrolled, in a staggered fashion in multiple study sites, multiple countries, over a period of several months. So then the last person to finish the 1-year follow-up also spreads out over a month. Right? One person may have finished the second dose of vaccine in March, and the last person may not finish the second dose of vaccine until October. We got to wait till the October person finishes that year. So do you see what I mean?
Yes.
And then we have to compile the data, analyze it, and then you submit it.
Gotcha.
So that's why I say we're in real time.
Okay.
We are learning about that as it goes on, but the FDA did not approve it based on immunity data. It approved it based on safety and efficacy. It didn't approve it. It granted it emergency use authorization.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Oh, one last question. They're just wheels are turning. Will the vaccine always be free? Or will it something once it's whatever, year, 2 years from now, you go to your doctor's office and they say, well, hey, you want the COVID vaccine? And you say, sure. Will that be billed through insurance or would it just be covered under government?
So I cannot answer that. I have no idea in which way we're going.
Yeah.
Certainly we've got a new administration coming in just tomorrow.
Yeah.
New head of Health and Human Services.
Right.
I'm sure all these people will weigh in on what the trajectory will be, how this will be managed with insurances, how this will be managed at your doctor's office. Yeah. You know, really speaks to population health, but also world health. And the other thing to think about is even though we're talking about these two vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, others are coming to market. We have AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Sanofi, Novavax are the next ones coming to market. In fact, one of them on Thursday will go before the FDA to request emergency use authorization. That being said, there are 123 countries, 123 companies, also developing COVID vaccines. And so although Moderna and Pfizer have been first to market, it remains to be seen after all the companies have finished their research and development, it remains to be seen whether they will be best in class.
Right.
So it's always advantageous to be first to market because you have no competitors. Right. But who will end up being best in class when all of this is said and done? Yeah. What I suspect is that we will have multiple vaccines on multiple platforms for multiple uses or populations or indications. So for instance, one vaccine might be better in children. One vaccine might be better in countries maybe that don't require refrigeration. The Pfizer vaccine requires such a cold refrigeration. One vaccine may be proved to be better in heart failure patients. One may be better in elderly. So we may see after all this is said and done that we have a number of COVID vaccines from which to choose that may be better depending on what population group we fit into or what special considerations we may have or our physicians may have. But right now, Moderna and Pfizer are for everybody because they were first to market. Always a great position to be in.
Doctor, I have two quick questions if that's okay. Have you gotten the vaccine?
I did. So I received the vaccine right at the beginning of January. I had some shoulder stiffness. And that probably lasted about 24 hours. I'm a big Pilates enthusiast. In fact, I teach
you like to
Pilates.
hike too, right?
So I have done quite a few fairly vigorous Pilates sessions since then. No disability whatsoever, including the day that my arm was sore. I taught that day. In fact, it really didn't feel any differently from the flu vaccine. If I hadn't known I took the COVID vaccine, I would have thought I had a flu shot. Those are exactly the symptoms that I had. So I have no nausea, vomiting, chills, fever, myalgias, headache. I didn't have any of that. So something to think about that you didn't ask, I'll just add, lawyers tell you, don't add stuff they didn't ask you, so I'm just going to add some information. In both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine trials, symptoms were actually more common after the second dose than the first dose, with the exception of myalgias for Moderna. Additionally, patients who are over 65 years of age have fewer symptoms after the second dose than those who are less than 65 years of age.
Interesting.
So that's something to think about as well. I mean, you're not 65, but you have relatives and things. So think about less symptoms if you're over 65 in general. This is what the data shows that went to the FDA. and more symptoms after the second dose than the first dose. Now, you may not have any symptoms at all, but it seems, according to the data, that symptoms were more frequent after the second dose.
Okay.
And so we should not be afraid of that or concerned with that, because that is our body telling us their immune system is kicking in, that the ribosomes are working, that we're getting ready to have full immunity. That's our body kind of kicking in. Think of an engine starting. That's what those side effects are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Doc, I think you answered my second question, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyways. Knowing that we still are waiting for that immunization data, the completed data, why did you specifically believe that it was still good to get this vaccine for yourself?
Yeah, so absolutely no question. And I'll give you some additional information. When we look at the data on the Black population in both of these trials, Moderna, I think, had enrollment of about 10.3%. African Americans in their trial, and Pfizer between 9.3 and 9.8%. And even though we represent 13.4% of the population, and this fell somewhat short of what that representation was, the average representation of African Americans in trials is somewhere less than 5%. So they actually did a really, really good job in their phase 3 programs, their big programs, of bringing us in, and it helped me to feel confident that the vaccines that they developed were relevant to me and relevant to my population. The other thing that was interesting, when I looked at the FDA briefing documents, in both companies, when we look at just the subpopulation of Blacks, for Moderna, after receiving the second dose, the only subpopulation that had zero, and I mean no incidences, no reports of a positive COVID infection was the Black population. In both Moderna and Pfizer, every other subgroup reported infections, and that's why their efficacy is at 94%, 95%, because it's not 100%.
Right.
The subgroup of African Americans were the only ones that were at zero. So I found that to be very interesting and very compelling. So I feel safe taking it. I certainly am encouraging others to do it. I want us to opt in, take care of ourselves. Our group, not just our group, but the whole BIPOC population, Blacks, indigenous people, and other people of color have all been disproportionately impacted. And so this is a path via which we can get back to a semblance of normalcy in our lives and to be safe. Because if we get the COVID-19, you don't know if you'll be one of those people with a mild course and asymptomatic, or if you will be horribly ill in the hospital all the way up to death. We have some ways of identifying patients, sometimes depending on what their underlying conditions, but then there are others that we're frankly scratching our head. We have no idea why their course was so severe. And so to me, if you look at 400,000 people died already from this disease, and we're continuing to march up, or you have an opportunity to get a vaccine. For me, it's sort of a no-brainer.
Because you can worry either way, but if you have some glimmer of protection.
And the other thing that I'll say is that even if you get the vaccine, you need to still wear a mask,
of course.
You need to still wash your hands, you need to still practice social distancing, because remember, it's not 100%. It's 94.5 and 95%, so there's a 5% chance you could still contract it. And since you've had the vaccine, you might not have any symptoms. And so then you can pass it on to others who might get horribly serious illness. So until we can get everybody up towards a herd immunity and sort of get on top of this, we've never been on top of it. We've always been sort of running behind it. You still would need to wear a mask and practice social distancing and washing your hands as well. And then the last thing that I would say, when I talked about 94.5 and 95% efficacy, meaning how well the vaccines work, The flu vaccine, by comparison, in any year, is anywhere between 45 and 60% effective. And that's why there's so much excitement over these vaccines, because they just sort of, knocked it out of the park at 94.5 and 95%.
That's what it seems. Like in a very short window.
Right.
That's what it seems.
Right.
So, but all the information that you gave, which I am very impressed that, the amount of information that but it's helped a lot to be on the other side of the wall.
Right.
And not get stuck in your own myths or what you've done throughout your whole entire life, and kind of bury your head in the sand and just let stuff. So I thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, because knowledge is power,
Yeah.
and really I think what I try to do is provide information so we can begin to dispel the myths.
Yep.
We have all of this historical context
Yeah.
of all the atrocities that have been done against our people in the name of research. And why should I step up now?
Right.
And this is why we need to have information such that we still might say no, but at least we have information to think about so we can make a decision based on real information and not based on fears and history.
Right.